Chapter 5, Halakha 10. A person who makes a vow or takes an oath in the name of a false deity is punished by lashes. Okay, this is a little different than last week or last time. We're going down in severity. So instead of losing the head or stoning or strangling or burning with fire, a person who takes a vow or makes a vow or an oath in the name of a false deity is punished by lashes. Let's see here. There's a commentary on this. It says, the punishment for this transgression by lashing is questioned by the commentaries on two counts. A, generally punishment is not given for the violation of a prohibition that does not involve a deed, and speech alone is not considered a deed. So a vow is something of speech, typically, or an oath, unless you write a contract, you know. But it's referring here that that punishment is typically only dealt with a deed, not by speech. Although an exception is made with regard to the prohibition of taking a false oath, the Ra'avad and others are not willing to accept the idea that this prohibition is also included in that exception. The Radbaz, in his response to 1619, nevertheless does, and thus justifies the Rambam's decision. Note also that Turei Even, which explains that because of the severity of the sin of idol worship, punishment is given even though no deed is involved. See chapter 3, Halakha 4. And the other case is B, when a transgression is punishable by death, lashes are never given for its violation. And that's sourced in Hilkot Sanhedrin. Since the same verse from Exodus is used as a source for both this prohibition and the prohibition against prophesying in the name of a false deity, the punishment of lashes should not be given, according to Pri Hadash. The Turei Even justifies the Rambam's position by explaining that the verse from Exodus is only an allusion, not an illusion, but an allusion, in other words, alluding to the prohibition against prophesying in the name of a false deity, and that this prohibition is actually derived from the passage in Deuteronomy. Accordingly, the Rambam considers them to be two separate commandments. Therefore, the rule mentioned is not appropriate in this instance. So the Rambam is separating these two ideas and saying that because it's not a deed, it's only speech, that the person isn't executed, even though it is making an oath in the name of a false deity, which is a form of idolatrous behavior. The majority of these things require execution. This one requires lashes. And then you have some of the poskim would say, well, because it's not a deed, it's not punishable at all. But the Rambam is giving such here, and there's others that agree with him. So there's somewhat of a discussion about it. What can I do for you?
If you don't punish the words, then the words become the actions.
Yeah, typically, if you that's usually up to the individual, though, to deal with the words that are coming out of their mouth, though. But these things with idolatry, they involve more than just one person, because this person is making oaths in the name of a false god, which can cause problems with other people. Okay. Okay, so this applies both to, excuse me here, let me pick back up. A person who makes a vow or takes an oath in the name of a false deity is punished by lashes, as Exodus 23:13 states, and you shall not mention the name of other gods. This applies both to one who takes such an oath for his own reasons and to one who takes such an oath because of a Gentile. It is forbidden to have a Gentile take an oath on his deity. It is even forbidden to mention the name of a Gentile deity without any connection to an oath, as implied by the expression, you shall not mention. So we've all heard this before. We've read it in the Torah that the gods of other nations or false deities other than Hashem should not pass our lips. So the question comes up, then why do we find written in the Tanakh different situations where the names of such deities are mentioned. It can seem like a contradiction, right? In some cases. But the reality is it's similar to the idea with Purim, with blotting out the name of Haman. Well, why do we say the name of Haman if we're trying to blot it out? Well, it's to remember that we're blotting out that name. So when the Tanakh, when Hashem had Moshe and all the prophets to write down these things, they're there for a purpose, these names. It's not just for arbitrarily mentioning the names. It's there's something to be learned from it. So it's important in some cases to know where, the different nations that Hashem conquered for the Israelites during their 42 journeys from Mitzrayim to the Promised Land. A lot of these names and situations come up in those instances. Yes, ma'am.
We talked in Rabbi Willis' class this morning about this because this month is the month of Tammuz.
Right. This month is the month of Tammuz, right?
Babylonian.
Yeah, it's the name of a Babylonian deity.
But he said when you're referring or mentioning the name as a month, that's different than you're mentioning as a god.
Yes, exactly. Miss Betty and I had Elisheva, we had an interesting conversation about that last time I was here. But yeah, there are times when it is appropriate to read these things, but we don't arbitrarily go around speaking the names of false deities, There's certain situations, Rabbi Tovia Singer talks about these ideas in some of his lectures. There's certain and also, Rabbi Gordon of blessed memory speaks about these, and Rabbi Skobach as well, about these situations where, for the sake of learning, in the appropriate manner, we would say different things to get an understanding of what's going on and things that we need to get away from or draw closer to or whatever the case, just for the sake of learning. But we never ever say these types of names or incantations or anything out of reverence. It's just for the sake of learning and nothing else. Okay. I don't know about you guys, but I'll be glad when we get, I'm glad we're studying this, but I'll be glad when we get through it and get into something a little lighter. These things can be so heavy, I know. But it's important for us to dig the idolatry out.
Right, that's why I have you teach this.
Right.
I get to teach the lights.
Right, yeah. So if you can't hear, Reuven is over here poking at me talking about how that's why he has me doing this class, because he gets to do the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So if you want to laugh, just watch him. Go to his class. If you want to go home crying, I guess you could come to watch my class on idolatry. Okay. So, you shall not mention, is what the Torah says, concerning the names of false deities, much less taking oaths or vows. I mean, come on. Halakha 11. A person should not tell a colleague, wait for me near a particular false deity or the like. This is pretty good. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, Mr. Asher Linga, the other day. We were talking about landmarks, and then here in the South, we don't use street names that much. There's a landmark for everything. But we were talking about, in this instance, a particular street, and on the corner of said street, there's a certain type of institution.
Right.
Well, it's a religious institution that propagates not so good religion, which it doesn't matter what it is, but it's not good according to the Torah. But we were talking about how to get to a certain place down these streets, and it was mentioned that there's a certain institution there, but we didn't mention it by name, and we talked about how it's improper to even point out that building as a landmark. So now this is taking things to a very high level. Okay, if it's common to you to say this, that, and this, it's not the end of the world. I'm not saying it's that you're going to, you know, go down to the hot place
Right.
for saying something. That's
The court isn't up, so we get it easy.
well, you want to judge yourself, so I mean, but you know, Hashem is full of mercy. So, anyways, we were talking about this very subject, that when you go by these places and you know they're there, it's fine. You're not really supposed to gaze at them. They put a lot of architecture into these buildings, in a lot of cases, you know. So it's like, it can be easy to look at them and be impressed by the architecture, but we're not supposed to take any notice of them. That's why they're built that way. There's to draw attention, so people are like, wow. But it's not wow, it's boo. So, anyways, it's a good idea to break the habit of using such places as landmarks and such. So, like to say, okay, Reuben, we're going to meet over by such and such place of worship.
Right.
No, let's go meet by Starbucks. Yeah. Okay. Or if there's even like a statue, you know, there's Greek type things and this and that all over the world.
Right.
Well, let's meet in front of the fountain of blah, blah, blah.
Madonna,
yeah, what Medusa or Snakehead, yeah.
Right.
No, don't do that.
So you don't want to meet in front of the statue of Sam Houston.
Say again?
Sam Houston.
I don't know if Sam Houston would be considered an idolatrous image, but
Yeah, as long as it's not viewed as a deity.
right, because it says here, it does tell us here, don't tell we should not tell a colleague, wait for me near a particular false deity or the like. So I think Sam Houston might be okay. Yeah, I don't think he's graduated to deity level. Right. Well, that's a good thing to bring up. So it's okay if you meet by the Sam Houston statue and by the zoo, right? Isn't it by the zoo?
Yeah, or there's the one in Huntsville,
Oh.
the big one.
Okay, so it is permitted to mention the name of any false deity that is mentioned in the Bible. For example, Peor, Baal, Nevo, God, G-A-D, not G-O-D, God, G-A-D, and the like. It is forbidden to cause others to take oaths or vows in the name of false deities. In regard to all these prohibitions, the only transgressor to be punished by lashing is one who himself makes a vow or an oath in the name of a false deity. So if you guys remember before, we talked about situations where the person speaking and the person that takes heed to the speech would both be punished. That's not the case with these vows. Only the person taking the vows. Yes, sir.
Does that mean that an observant Jew would not be allowed to serve as a judge, an American judge, because the judges are required to have the people in court swear with their hand on the Christian Bible? And they're not going to law.
You can, in America, you are allowed to choose to affirm without putting your hand on the Bible.
That is a very good question. The question was, is an observant Jewish person, or for that matter, any Jewish person, because the laws are the same for all Jewish people, whether they're observant or not. That's kind of whether they choose to be observant or not doesn't nullify the law that concerns them. These laws are for all the nation of Israel, observant or not. But that's a very good question. The question was, if you have a person that's an observant Jewish person that goes by these laws, is he allowed to be a judge in the American court system because of the event of requiring people to take an oath by putting their hand on a Christian Bible? I'm going to tell you, I don't know. But that is a very good question. That is a good question that I will ask my rabbi, and I will get back to you on that.
Unless they allowed them to use the Tanakh or something like that. But it'd be good to know that, though.
But I
Because
know,
I've never thought about it.
but I know you're not required by law to put your hand on that book.
Nor are you required to say, so help me God, I think.
Right. You just have to say that you're not lying.
Well, you say I affirm.
Yeah.
You are allowed, like, in legal technical terms, having had to do it, you are allowed to say I affirm, and you do not have to.
Right.
So you can say that I affirm that I'm telling the truth and the whole truth.
Which, according to our standard, would probably be the best thing.
Yeah, of course.
Just say I affirm. I let your
Right.
word be yes, be yes.
Of course, and that applies to any person that would have to go to trial in a non-Jewish court in America. But whether or not a Jewish person, whether it's acceptable for them to be a judge in such court because of those things, I can't say. I'm not sure. It's a very good question. Okay, we're moving on to another chapter. Yay! Chapter 6.
Wow.
It's only been several months.
6 months.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're on class number 13, 12 or 13. So, anyways, chapter 6, Halakha 1. Anyone who willingly, as a conscious act of defiance, performs the deeds associated with an Av or a Yidoni is liable for karet. If witnesses were present and warned him, he should be stoned to death. If he performed these actions inadvertently, he must bring a fixed sin offering. What do the deeds? I was going to say disease. It's trying to come out with disease
Might
here.
as well be.
Yeah.
Die for it.
So what do the deeds associated with an Av involve? A person stands up and offers an incense offering of known content. He holds a wand of myrtle in his hand and waves it while whispering a known incantation in a hushed tone. This continues until the person making the inquiry hears a voice as if another person is speaking to him and replying to his questions. Everybody thoroughly confused yet?
Yes.
It is creepy. Okay, it appears as if the words are coming from below the earth in a very low tone to the extent that it cannot be perceived by the ear, but only sensed by thought. What we're talking about here is spiritual mediums. People that invoke the dark world, if you want to call it. Yes.
What?
Yes.
Right. It's like mediums who say they hear
They're incanting.
right. They hear the voice of their family or whatever. They're actually hearing the voices of a messenger sometimes.
Right. They consult other spirits, if you would. I think the Yidoni is specifically a necromancer.
They'll talk into the dead.
Talking, yeah, like conjuring up the dead.
Like in voodoo, they'll use bones because it kind of helps bring a connection to the dead.
So it's the Rambam here is giving us an explanation of their actions, which is pretty detailed. So similarly, among the deeds associated with an Av is taking the skull of a corpse, offering incense, and chanting incantations until one hears a voice in a very low tone emanating from one's armpits and replying to one's questions. So,
A little weird.
a little strange. I never heard my armpits talking, thank God.
I've smelled them.
We don't want to talk about that. Hearing, not smelling.
Okay. They can talk to you by smell.
Oh yeah, they can talk to all kinds of people, especially this time of year in Houston.
Right.
Boy. Okay. Thank God that we can use spray deodorant.
Yeah.
On Shabbat we can't smear.
Use
so
spray.
have to spray.
Right.
Thank God we can spray.
Absolutely. Please use deodorant.
Yeah, please use deodorant for Shabbat and every day.
Right. Right.
Please. Okay. So it appears that as if the words are coming from below the earth in a very low tone, to the extent that it cannot be perceived by the ear, but only sensed by thought. Similarly, among the deeds associated with an Av is taking the skull of a corpse, offering incense, and chanting incantations until one hears a voice in a very low tone emanating from one's armpits, and replying to one's questions. Anyone who performs one of these acts should be stoned to death, or like we would say, rocked to sleep.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Question. Go.
Yes. I intentionally have not looked up much in regards to this, but a lot of the necromancy stuff that was justifying sounds similar to that which was performed by the Aztecs in the ancient Americas. I have a is that it did like all of them migrate across Russia to the Americas?
I'm confused.
He's wondering how did that practice show up in South America?
You
How
just,
they
you
show up
just
in
described
all
the
such
necromancy,
like the whole
the Aztec.
community.
Right.
They went to war with the other peoples in the area to get the materials and human prisoners to use in their religion. So the whole people was in it, participating in some level on it.
So if I'm understanding you, you're talking about different cultures in South America, Central South America, that in ancient times would do these practices that we're discussing. And are you asking how did they learn this?
How did so many of them end up?
Okay, I think I have an answer. The question is, how did so many of them, different cultures, end up doing these things? Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. All human beings emanate from one soul. It's easy for people to have a concept that we're owners of our own soul, and that the soul that we carry has our name on it. Well, it does have our name on it, but it's not us specifically. The soul.
Our body has our soul's name on
The soul came from Adam Rishon. He was the first. We all emanate from one person, from Adam Rishon, Adam, and he was split into two people, wasn't he? Male and female. Then they produced children, which means they split into more people, and then here we are today. What, roughly 7.5 billion people living on the earth? Not even to mention everyone who has passed away for the last 5,778 years. Okay. Is that right? 5778?
Right.
Thank you. So what has happened is, just to make it simple, we're all fragments of that one soul. All of us. So I'm not saying that it's unimportant to think about the soul that you have, that you're in charge of, or that you're working with, or whatever the case, that animates your body. Of course, that's your responsibility, for the responsibility of each one of us, to learn what we're supposed to learn, and do what we're supposed to do, and not do what we're supposed to not do, and all these different things. But ultimately, we're all connected, and we always have been, and we always will be. The human soul is a fragmentation of one vessel, and that vessel was created for the purpose of receiving pleasure from Hashem, to be a receptacle of Hashem's giving. Okay, what goes wrong is when the vessel gets into a state of uncleanliness. then the blessings that come from Hashem's giving turns into curses. And when you have vessels, for example, cultures and nations of corrupt vessels, then corrupted practices propagate more and more. Negativity has this way of growing. What's the saying about if you take a good person and put him into a group of bad people that do bad things, who's going to be affected the most? The good person or the bad people? Yeah, the good person unfortunately has a tendency to be dragged down to the bad behavior. So for some reason, negativity and darkness can have a great influence on individuals, families, communities, tribes, nations, the entire human race. That's why it's such a fight to be a righteous person. It's a struggle and a fight. It's the sages teach us that the moment that we seek out righteousness and we put our mind and thoughts towards doing something good, the obstacle to stop us from doing that good thing is immediately put in front of us. One explanation of this is because if it's not hard, it's not worth anything to us. Say again? The bread of shame, yes. The idea of the bread of shame. It's like Rabbi Cohen explained. It's like the poor man who stands at the gate of the rich man. The poor man is disabled for whatever reason. He can't work, and he's a beggar and he needs food. And the rich man is very kind, and every day when he comes out of the gate, he gives bread to the poor man. Well, the poor man can't look him in the face because he can't do anything to earn the bread. That's the idea of the bread of shame. It's the same way with human beings towards Hashem. There's no way we can pay Hashem for giving us life and giving us blessings. There's, like it was brought up by Charlie, the idea of the bread of shame. We want to do something and give something back. So by the obstacle being put in front of us, it gives us a sense of accomplishment when we overcome that obstacle and achieve righteous deeds and actions and behaviors and speech. But unfortunately, the darkness and the negativity, it's connected to all of us. It's not so much about something coming from across the Bering Strait into a different country as it is just carried on through the human condition. Something inside of us called the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, will drive us to do such things if we allow it. And it works equally with righteousness and with sinfulness. The more sin a person does, the easier it becomes. The more righteousness a person does, it builds up and it becomes easier to do more righteousness. So that's, if that makes sense, I think that that might be an answer to your question. What do you think? Yes?
Same thing goes for money and work.
Money and work, in what way?
Having listened to a lot of my mother's podcasts on money and how to deal with it, that sounds a lot like how money works. Once you get it started earning and not getting into debt, it becomes easier and easier as you go along.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's
And
true.
debt's the same way. Once you start getting in debt, it's easier to get more.
It's easier to stay in debt, yeah. Thank you. That's a good parallel. There's another parallel with money and work. If somebody just gives you money, it doesn't mean so much after a while, but if you have to work for it, it means a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. There's that rabbit. He's right back over here. Yeah.
Hunt that thing down.
Okay. So what do the deeds associated with a Yidoni involve? So we talked about an Av a little bit, not an Av like a father. It might, let me see what I got here. That might be, I might be pronouncing that wrong.
How is it spelled? Olive back.
Ov.
Oh,
It's not Av. My apologies. It's Ov. It's Aleph, Vav, Bet. Ov. Ov. And Yidoni. So the Ov, we went over the idea of what an Ov would do, what type of deeds that he would be associated with. So what do the deeds associated with a Yidoni involve? A person places a bone from a bird, the bones, you mentioned the bones. So the person places a bone from a bird whose name is Yedua in his mouth, offers incense, and performs other deeds until he falls into a trance, losing self-control like an epileptic, and relates events which will occur in the future. Wow. So it's like a possession.
Very specific, aren't they? They're very specific.
Yes. The Rambam,
To Hashem's power in the
well,
law. That's what it sounds like. Because if you remember the room in the temple, I think it was with the ark, when the high priest would go in there, they were beyond time and space, and they could see
yeah,
the future.
but we can't connect this with the service in the Holy Temple.
No.
That's not appropriate. This is something else.
Yeah, this is. Yeah.
If you'll excuse me, we can't.
If it is connected with the things of Hashem, it's doing very, very much in the wrong way, and it's not connected. It's really not connected.
Whatever these things are connecting to requires one to be put to death if they're found doing it.
Right.
So it's not anything good.
It doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Oh yeah,
They
it
can't
can,
do
yeah, it can happen.
They can do it. It's just clearly it's something that shouldn't be done.
Yes, it's not permitted.
Right. It's rare in our culture today, but in a lot of cultures in Africa and in some countries, it's still very, very much practiced.
And even in the South American countries, it's
Right.
still.
So all of these are types of idol worship. We have to remember that that's what all these things relate to is idolatry that we're discussing here. So all of these are types of idol worship. And what is the source for the warning against them? It's from Leviticus 19:31. Do not turn to the Ovot or the Yedonim. It specifically says, do not listen to what they say. Don't turn to them. Don't go to spiritual mediums and necromancers. Don't do it. That's what's called a Daraita prohibition. It's directly from the Torah. It's not it's not the oral explanation, and it's not a rabbinical decree.
Right.
It's directly from the Torah. Halakha 3, anyone who willingly, as a conscious act of defiance, gives of his progeny to Molech is liable for karet. We talked about this before. Molech would be the body of a person, the effigy of a person, sitting on a throne with hands extended forward with the head of an ox, typically. And in the lap of the effigy was a furnace. And God forbid, people would take their children and pass them through the hands of the effigy into the furnace as an offering to this thing. It's very bad. So anyone who willingly, as a conscious act of defiance, gives of his progeny to Molech is liable for karet, which is to be cut off from his people. If he did so inadvertently, he must bring a fixed sin offering. If you guys remember in the Torah, there are commandments concerning different types of offerings. There's sin offerings in which a person can bring either like a bull or a goat or a lamb If they can't afford that, they could bring 2 turtle doves. If they can't afford that, they could bring a grain offering or something of. It's very detailed in Leviticus. But here it says for this case it has to be a fixed sin offering, so they have to bring the mandated offering. They don't have the option to bring something lesser.
I have a difficult time understanding, I'm sure that the rabbis have discussed it, but how anyone could do this inadvertently.
Yes.
I'm sure there's an answer, but how, because there's a rule,
Right.
so there must be an instance where
Right.
this can happen inadvertently. I mean, I'm just trying to understand
Right.
how that would be.
Right. We will find out. We will find out how one could. What is it considered? What does it mean to do this inadvertently? Yeah. It obviously doesn't mean out of ignorance you go up to Molech and do this.
Right.
There's definitely going to be an explanation for this, and we may come across it here, but if not, I will get to the bottom of it.
It might possibly be like if you get shoved and accidentally bump into it like that.
No, you shouldn't even be around it. Yeah.
No, there's a valley. There's a valley in Israel called Gehinnom. It's a place that's still there today. It was cursed by the prophet Jeremiah for these things, specifically. It's still cursed today.
Well, I think inadvertently that the house for safety and they go and do it.
That's possible. That's a possibility. Okay. So, if witnesses were present and warned him, he should be stoned to death. As Leviticus chapter 20 verse 2 states, whoever gives of his progeny to Molech will surely die. The people will stone him. It's another direct Torah prohibition, specifically talking about making offerings of your children to Molech. Okay. So this could be alluding to that inadvertently means that he was ignorant of it being a Torah prohibition. This person could possibly be ignorant that it's a Torah prohibition.
That's how you
Because this may be, he wasn't warned and he didn't know that it was prohibited.
So that seems to be the logical.
This is hard to understand today because we might think it's hard to understand today, but people offer their children to different things today. The people line up at the clinics by the droves to offer their children to the sewer system.
Right.
And it's a tragedy,
Right.
to say the least. But in these days, this was common practice.
Abortion.
Abortion. So these were common practices amongst certain peoples in which the Israelite people came out of. Okay, this is why there's an obvious reason why this would be a direct prohibition in the Torah to Israelites, because they were obviously mixed in with nations who commonly practice these forms of idolatry.
One thing that is often asked, these things seem to be such harsh punishments for this various different things. And I heard a great explanation. It said that because of where Israel was coming from and where they were going to, because the whole world was filled with idolatry, it was the normal practice. Like today, much of the world's either Muslim or Christian. Okay?
Sure.
And that's just the way it is, and that's their practices. But think about the equal number of people, Muslim and Christian, all idolaters, doing all these horrible, despicable things, immorality, sacrifice no children. And Hashem had to make this this had to sink in to people who were like immature and didn't really know. I mean, they didn't know these things because that was the norm in the culture. And that's why it's so like absolutely strict. This is what's going to happen: death, stoning, etc. Because it had to be drilled home. This
Yes.
is absolutely forbidden, and that's why today we have a society that's pretty much divorced itself from those kinds of practices because of that harshness that took place 3,700 years ago.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and the sages explain, more recent sages explain that the world doesn't deal with idolatry in the way it was at this time.
Right.
Since the Second Temple and the men of the Great Assembly,
Right.
idolatry has been greatly reduced from the face of the earth.
Miracle. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Prophecy has also diminished,
Right.
but thank God we're not fighting with idolatry in the way that they did in these days.
Right.
It's like you were explaining, every nation in the world that worshipped any type of gods were worshiping false gods except for Israel.
Right.
Everyone.
Right.
And the Rambam explains this, that all this started with the grandson of Adam. His name was, not with him specifically, but in his generation, the wise men of his generation started to worship stars and constellations, which evolved into full-blown idolatrous behavior, which is what we're reading about now.
Absolutely.
And I know that's a harsh subject to bring up about abortion in this, because we can read these things and it just seems so far from humanity to put a child into a fire,
Right.
much less for it to be common practice. But if we really look at humanity today, it's so much different.
A more sterile way of doing it.
Yeah, it's more more sterile and more hands off from the public.
Right.
Well, from public view, I don't know about. Yeah, everybody knows about it, but it's kind of what they do over there. But it's as equally destructive. It's still the waste. I know there's all types of discussions, and I apologize. I don't mean to offend anyone, but I'm not attempting to get into politics. We're talking about human life, and I know certain people have certain views about when life starts. According to the Torah, life starts at 40 days after conception. So, the cells, they come together and then they form into a living being after 40 days. Yes. So basically, if you have a husband and a wife and they want to have a boy or a girl, you got 40 days to ask Hashem whether it's going to be a boy or a girl.
Right.
Once you get to 40 days, it's either a boy or a girl.
Right.
But it is a person. And it's meant to be born in this world, not to be torn out and killed. I know, as bad as that sounds, it's my apologies, but it's a way of connecting these ideas from 800 to 3,000 years ago to right now. Very bad. So please forgive me if I offended anyone. Call me on the phone, we'll talk about it. Okay.
Before we move on, remind me of something that Rabbi Wilby said this morning about the third temple will be built when the things that caused the first two temples to be destroyed are corrected. He said, obviously, we have not corrected those things because we don't have the third temple. So maybe there is this idolatry still going on in the world, not just in different forms than what they were dealing with. There's obviously still things going on in the world that caused those first two temples to be destroyed that have not been corrected.
See, I just want to say this. It's not about what goes on in the world. It's about what's going on with Israel and the Jewish people.
That's what I was going to say as well.
Abortion rates
really what he
in
said.
Israel is just as high as it is here. It's
you're
shocking.
correct.
Okay,
I should have narrowed it
yeah,
down.
yeah, okay.
The things that, whatever caused those first
Right.
two temples to be destroyed have not been corrected.
Right. Otherwise, it would have we would already have the third temple. Okay. Very good. Thank you for sharing that.
What were those two things? Faceless hatred.
Idolatry was a big one.
Idolatry.
Faceless.
The first temple was destroyed because of idolatry and not taking care of the widows, orphans, and proselytes. The second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred.
I was not about to say.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
The men of the Great Assembly, because of the merit of the men of the Great Assembly, idolatry, the desire for idolatry was lifted from the nation of Israel during their time. But also, like we said earlier, prophecy diminished as well. Okay. So which verse serves as a warning for this prohibition? Do not give of your progeny to Molech. That's Leviticus 18:20. Also, further on in Deuteronomy 18:10 states, there shall not be found among you one who passes his son or daughter through fire. What was done? In other words, what did they do here? A person would kindle a great fire and then take some of his progeny, which is his own children. Progeny is your direct descendants, and give them to the priests who serve the fire. After the child was given to them, the priest returned the son to his father to pass him through the fire at his will. The father of the child is the one who passes his child through the fire with the priest's permission. He passes him through the fire from one side to the other while carrying him, the father walking on his feet in the midst of the flames. Thus the father does not cremate his son to Molech as sons and daughters are cremated in the worship of other deities. Rather, this form of worship called Molech involved merely passing the child through the fire. Therefore, if one performed this service to a deity other than Molech, one is not liable. Now, this sounds strange, but this goes back to the idea of specific modes of worship that are designated for specific false deities. We talked about how the worship of Peor, people would, this is a little grotesque, bear with me, they would walk up, stand up in front of the deity, squat down, and defecate. It's disgusting. Then there was another one in particular, Marculus. Yeah, Marculus, the Torah says was Marculus. People would go up in front of it and pelt it with rocks. So the Rambam explains that if a person went over to Peor and pelted it with rocks, he's not liable.
Because it wasn't part of the practice.
Because it wasn't part of the practice, right. But if he goes over, or if he goes to Marculus and does the defecation nonsense, he's not liable. So interesting stuff. This stuff is very detailed, you know, and the explanations in the Talmud go even into more depth.
Right.
That makes the last one make more sense though, because how could you cause your child to pass through fire from Molech unknowingly? Well, if you walk through, there's a path for fire. You walk through the fire, but you had no idea that was some type of worship of that God. That's how you do it.
True.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I've seen false gods, and I know that they're people's gods, but I have no idea how they worship them.
And that's good.
So I could accidentally do something that would be seen as worshiping that God that I have no clue. So therefore, I would do it out of complete ignorance.
Right. I mean, there's, you can go to certain establishments and there's little altars of this and that, and if you don't know what it is and what they're doing, you're completely, you're oblivious to it.
Yeah, Asian restaurants.
And sometimes I don't even realize that they're, forever, there was this statue in a restaurant that we went to a long time ago. I had no idea what it was. To me, it was just part of the decor, and I had no idea. And somebody was doing something weird, and I asked about it, and I was like, oh, okay, and never went back to the restaurant.
That was the end of that, huh?
I was like, I had no idea, okay, staying away from this. But yeah, that's how you would end up accidentally doing it.
Right, and there's Hinduism. Hinduism is a largely practiced idolatrous type of religion. They have over 1 million things that they call deities. So, if you ever, with any type of consistency around Hindu peoples, you'll come across paintings and photos and all this of these different false deities, you know.
And I would never have an idea that they were.
Right.
Because just
And it wouldn't
outside of
matter.
my realm.
And it doesn't matter, and that's the best policy is we shouldn't be studying those things
Exactly.
at all. The Rambam tells us here in these writings that we should not be, the Torah teaches us that we should not study, we should not take it upon ourselves to study the modes of idolatrous worship, even for educational purposes. What we should be studying is what the sages bring down from the Torah, from the written Torah, the oral Torah, from the prophets, the Tanakh, and so on and so forth, in order to make ourselves righteous.
But if we do know it, then we have a responsibility.
Yes, if we do know it, we have a responsibility, yes.
So when somebody points out, well, you did this thing, you have to make it right. But if you don't know, you're not liable for it.
If you don't know, you're not liable. That's right. Inadvertent. Yes, sir. Okay. All right, so he is not held liable until he gives over some of his progeny and leaves some of his progeny, as implied by Leviticus chapter 20, verse 3. For he gave of his progeny to Molech, for example, some of his progeny and not his entire progeny. Okay. The prohibition against giving one's, this is Halakha 5, excuse me. The prohibition against giving one's progeny to Molech includes both progeny of legitimate pedigree and illegitimate pedigree, sons and daughters, children and grandchildren. One is liable for giving over any of one's descendants because they are all included in the term progeny. So like I said a few minutes ago, it's descendants, direct descendants that are related to you. Okay. Does that include one's wife? That's not
I
progeny.
don't think it'd be progeny, no, it's not.
So can you pass your wife?
I was just thinking in general, progeny, I mean, wouldn't it be, it would be inappropriate to do it to anybody?
I don't know. Maybe,
It's like, okay,
you know-
it's not my progeny, so it's
Just
okay
use
to
somebody
do it.
else's child, right?
Yeah, somebody else's
But
kid.
it seems though that the only benefit to that individual is to do progeny, is to,
that's the mode of,
it'd be like giving charity that's not your money. Like, oh, I gave $300, but I got out of her purse. I don't get any credit for that.
right.
Right. I mean, so that would be I think that's what it would be. It's like, that's why they did their own progeny.
Well, just because it's saying here that one's not liable if it's not their progeny,
Right, right.
it's not saying that it's good.
Right.
We have to remember that none of this is good, whether it's with a dog or a cat or your wife or your neighbor's progeny
Right.
or your brother-in-law. It doesn't. None of that's good to pass someone through the flames of idolatrous services.
If someone wasn't able to be pinned down to the service of one of those deities by the invention of one of the loopholes, wouldn't they still be liable for murder?
If they killed someone and they're convicted, they're liable for murder.
But I think that the mullet thing is not necessarily, I don't know if they're killing their child, but they're passing to the fire. It's a ritual of blessing from mullet. And there is also the other where they push them into the fire and they burn them. So there's two different things here going on.
The one we're talking about now is the passing through.
Right.
And, I mean, there's other instances that have to do with this that aren't written in these laws because this is about the laws of the mode of idolatrous worship to these things that one can be, what do you call it, not executed, liable for it or found guilty.
But
What do you call that?
The thing is, they still have to have witnesses.
What? No, yeah, but
It still has to have witnesses. I mean,
yeah.
if you don't have witnesses that didn't warn them, then none of this stuff's material because no one really knows.
Right, and you know, with all due respect to all of us here, we're not scholars of Jewish law. You know, we're just scratching the surface on this stuff. So there's many in-depth explanations to this. There's people that I'm sure that can make it very clear. Forgive me for my lack of ability, but we're trying to learn the best we can at this point. And I hope I'm not messing it up too bad. Okay, Hashem, please forgive me. So, in contrast, here we go. This is with the wife or the brother-in-law. I'm about to answer my own question. In contrast, if one passed one's brothers, sisters, or ancestors through the fire, or if one caused oneself to be passed through the fires, one is not held liable. A person who passes one of his progeny through the fire while he is sleeping or blind is not liable. Okay. Why? Because the Torah prohibition says do not pass your progeny through the fires of Molech. Is it a good thing to pass one's brothers, sisters, ancestors through the fire? No. But the direct mode of service to Molech is for one to pass his progeny through the fire. So it's not a good thing to pass anybody through any fire, Molech or not, or the barbecue. Don't do it. It's not good. But you're not liable for this idolatrous mode of worship unless you pass Has v'shalom, God forbid, unless you pass your progeny through it. Don't do it.
Could you say it's the prescribed ritual for this type of worship is this specific thing?
Right.
Yes.
If you are found liable of doing that specific ritual, that specific word of God, that's when it is against.
Right. Because
Yes.
all the other things are not prescribed ritual.
You're not prescribed ritual.
Exactly. So, like the lady explained with great clarity, these are direct prescriptions of modes of worship for these specific things that the Torah says not to do. If you're found liable, good night. You get the stones.
Only if there's a court.
Only if you've been warned.
Right, right.
Only if you've been witnesses, and only if the 71 judges in the Sanhedrin find you guilty.
That's through a fire walking.
Oh, yeah, probably so. I never thought about that.
Could be.
That's interesting.
I've always been scared to do that. Walking on coals. What is it?
Those Legos are worse.
Legos are worse. Yeah, Legos. I've stepped on Legos. You're right. That is
Would be
painful.
Just as bad. Do a Lego walk. They ought to do that in a business conference, right?
Yeah.
Have a brought over Legos.
Yeah, a case of wine and a box of Legos.
Yeah,
Huh?
exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
They
ridiculous.
should stop using spike traps on the roads
Just
to
use
catch
Legos,
criminals.
right?
They just use Legos.
Right.
Whee!
Okay, guys, one more halakha, and then we're going to stop reading today. Maybe have a little discussion, lighten it up a little bit. So halakha 6, a monument which the Torah has forbidden is a structure around which people gather. This prohibition applies even when it was constructed for the service of God. Because this is a pagan practice, as Deuteronomy 16:22 states, do not erect a monument which God hates. Whoever erects a monument is punished by lashes. Similarly, a person who bows down on the kneeling stone mentioned in the Torah receives lashes. Even if he prostrates oneself upon it to God, as Leviticus 26:1 states, do not place a kneeling stone in your land to prostrate yourself upon it. The pagans would customarily place a stone before a false deity so that they could prostrate themselves upon it. Therefore, this practice is not followed in the worship of God, or Hashem specifically. A person is not punished by lashes until he spreads out his hands and feet on the stone, thus prostrating himself on it entirely. This is what the Torah means by bowing. So he stands there with the feet, bends down and puts the hands, and then lays his entire body on the stone. That is prostration, according to the Torah. So this brings up a thought about not going into places that were formerly used for idolatrous worship to establish a place of worship for Hashem. We can't buy a false god former temple and make it into a synagogue. Can't do it. So we don't go into structures that were erected for idolatrous purposes to worship Hashem. It's forbidden.
No turning churches into synagogues.
Well, we're not going to put that on the camera, but thank you. That's a good point, but we're going to leave that. We're going to leave that here. Okay. So, thank you for joining us today. Next time we're going to be in chapter 6, Halakai 8, and right now we're going to go into questions and comments and anything that anybody has to add. Thank you for participation.